Hello everybody and welcome to episode 16 of A Question of Property. My name is Lucia France and I'm your host for this show, and we're joined by our usual panel of amazing experts. We've got John Howard, property expert of over 40 years experience in the industry and author of 3 different books on the subject, including Buying and Selling at Auction. Hello to you, John.
Hi, good to see you.
Good to see you too. We've got Stefano Lucatello, Senior Partner at Cobalt Law International Property Lawyers, and our go-to for advice on buying and selling property in Europe. So good morning to you, Stefano.
Morning, Lucia.
Morning. And of course, Paul, our best-selling author, award-winning property speaker, and head of Nova Financial Group. So nice to see you, Paul. Good morning to you.
Morning, Lucia. Okay,
so we're going to kick off with our starter questions, and we've actually got 2 here today. So you can answer both. If you don't mind.
Thanks.
So this one is, someone wrote in and asked this one, does everyone wear a full suit, or do you just dress your top halves for the show? And the second question is, the place you wish you'd bought a property in the past but didn't.
Oh, so, that's an easy one for me.
Go to John first.
Okay, well the first thing, yes, I always try and be professional, and people say, oh, John, you're very old-fashioned, because normally I wear, when I'm doing my seminars and when I'm doing TV stuff, and I wear a suit and I always wear a tie, because I think it's professional and it makes me feel that I'm on the ball and ready to go. And everyone has a different attitude to that. I appreciate that. The second question is very easy for me. Walberswick is a lovely village near Southwold, which is on the Suffolk coast, beautiful. And many years, well, in the 1992 recession, I got offered 7 flats in Walberswick for 250,000. Long story short, they then tried to put it up to 260,000, the price, and I said, I'm not paying another 10,000. I'm not buying it, so I didn't buy it. Those flats today are worth 300,000 each, minimum, 350 each probably. Ouch, ouch, ouch. Every time I walk the dog, it destroys me. I can't even walk past the building.
Oh no,
What
that's
can I
not
do?
true. That's not good. Hopefully...
It's not funny, Paul. It's sad.
John, where's your tie today? We're not special enough.
When I'm at home, I haven't been wearing a tie because I feel it's a little bit over the top. But normally I do, as well you know, Paul.
So it's just...
Yeah. That's very true.
Okay, Paul, if you could answer those 2 for us as well, please.
Okay. Yes, I'm more formal on the bottom half at the moment, actually.
I don't think we need to know that
part. So yes, that answers that question, I suppose. Well, look, I think any decent location. Well, that's not true, actually. All right. Probably the best answer to that. My hometown, where I grew up, is an hour north of Sydney. It's a beach, kind of a beach town. 10 years, it's doubled in price over the past 10 years. And I'm looking at buying a place there at the moment. And you can't get anything half decent for under $1 million. Whereas I probably could have got those same properties for about 500 grand 10 years ago.
Okay. Good to know. Good to know. And nice to know when you head back home as well. Stefano, what's your answers to these ones?
As a solicitor, I'm always formally dressed, with or without a tie. I always look impeccable. Thank you, John. And secondly...
Stefano, can I stop you there? Can you just tell the audience how many ties you've got and how many suits you've got and how many shirts you've got, please? Because it's really interesting.
I'd like to know.
Over 150 suits and over 350 ties.
Whoa.
There you go. I told you it was interesting.
Over 150 pairs of shoes.
Are they all colour-coded?
Absolutely.
How long have you had those suits for, Stefano?
Sorry again?
Out of interest, how long? Like, are some of those 20 years old, or have you acquired them all in the past 5 to 10 years? Because
they go on a rolling mission. What happens is that every year or so I throw some suits out and I give them to charity. I'll tell you why, just as a quick aside. When I came down to London from Hull as a young trainee solicitor article clerk, I came down with 2 suits and a couple of shirts. And I started working in the West End in Mayfair in Dover Street. And I noticed within 2 days that all my contemporaries had a different shirt, a different suit, different pair of shoes, By the end of week 1, I rang my mother up and said, you need to send me 500 quid down because these people are changing shirts and whatever. So that's how it came about. And ever since then, I've always had a big array of suits. and ties. And I love ties. I have a collection of Leonard silk ties.
They're lovely.
And John's seen them because he's seen them on TV with me. And each one of them has a limited edition number on the back. They're each individual, and they cost a bomb. But for me personally, as a lawyer, I like to feel good. And I think it's for all of us. We're all professionals.
Yeah, I think you're
all
right.
three of us. When you've got a nice suit, nice tie, you feel great, and you go into a business meeting, you feel good, as opposed to feel. I would never go into a business. Only in the lockdown do I go into business meetings.
Yeah.
Now, but
No, yeah, I agree with both of you. It's very much a mindset thing.
Yeah, and remember that it doesn't matter which profession you're in. The impression that a person makes within the 30 seconds of you going into a meeting will be the impression that he takes away, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, and you can't get rid of that. So I've got one shot, as we all have, at impressing a client, not only with what I know, hopefully, but with what I'm wearing. And John's right.
If I can just say, the other thing I believe is that actually it shows respect to the people who you meet.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. I mean, especially, if they don't want to dress like that's fine, but it shows respect that you made an effort to meet them and be professional. And I think that's very important.
Yeah,
absolutely. They say that you have a fraction of a second visually for somebody to form a first impression, and you have 4 seconds verbally.
Stefano. Yeah.
Well, actually, speaking as somebody who has spent most of lockdown with just one bag of clothes because of I only thought I was going to be here for a week, and obviously then lockdown happened. My sister, bless her, she sent me a whole box of my clothes and piled them folded them all up, and they sent beautifully. And I feel so much better now that I've got my own clothes back. So yeah.
Let's see. You need to get rid of that one you're wearing today, because I noticed it's got all sorts of holes on it. It's gone through the washing machine a few times.
Butterflies.
Lovely.
Beautiful.
Very elegant.
Very trendy.
Very elegant.
Very
right.
He's a charmer. He's a charmer, isn't he?
To property. Okay. So first question now is for Paul. What is your view, Paul, regarding interest rates over the next 10 years, please?
Wow.
It can obviously make a big difference to your net rental return per month if it goes up a lot. So we're basically, can you predict the future here, Paul, please?
Look, obviously I can't. I don't have a crystal ball, but there is one obvious thing. They can only go one direction. We're at historical low interest rates. And they can't really come down any further unless they go to zero. So therefore they will increase at some point. However, I wouldn't be too concerned about this. And the reason I say that is, I assume we're talking about buy-to-let mortgages here and how that's going off. You mentioned net rent. So lenders now will stress test your mortgage for you at an interest rate of 5.5%. So even if you're borrowing at 2%, your rent needs to be sufficient to cover not just 5.5%, but also cover that 125% of the time.
Right.
So there's a calculation there that they run. Now, you used to have to do that for yourself. It's now done for you. It's still worth doing it yourself to understand what your sort of break-even point is, so far as what rates would have to go to for you to start to make a loss. But that is a pretty substantial change, to go from 2% to 5.5%. It's not just a tripling of the rate, because the base rate at the moment is it 0.1%? Am I right in saying that?
Yeah.
Well, it came down to over lockdown. You help me out there, guys?
Yes.
It's 0.1%. So if you're borrowing at 2%, the bank's margin is 1.9.
Yep.
And therefore, for the rate to go to 5.5, that is a massive increase from where it is now. So you need to be conscious of these things. You need to stress test your mortgages. But so long as your rent is sufficient to be covering that sort of rate of around 5.5%, I'd say you're pretty comfortable for the next 10 years, at least.
Okay, great. That's good. Thank you very much, Paul. Anything to add there, guys, to that one?
I think if you try and predict the future, you might not always get it right. It's very difficult to predict the future. And I agree with what Paul says, that we're at rock bottom, so it couldn't go much lower, but it might just stay the same as opposed to going up.
Okay.
I just quickly, what I would say, of course, if they keep printing money, then people say, well, if the government keep printing money like they have been doing, then that will cause inflation. Inflation has never been a bad thing for the property industry at all, to be honest with you. However, it potentially will push interest rates up. But, you know, should you be doing deals if you can't afford to pay, you know, I mean, deals or invest in property, whatever, if you can't afford to pay probably at least double what you're paying now in interest, you know, if you can't afford to do that, then really you should be doing it anyway.
Right.
And what you've said there, John, obviously that's the opinion of a lot of people. Obviously, they are printing money at the moment, and that might affect inflation. But if we look back at the last recession, they printed a hell of a lot of money then, and it didn't drive up interest rates.
No, it didn't. I agree with that. Yeah.
Thanks very much, guys. Thank you for your input there. Okay, let's move to Stefano then. We're all of your questions today about Spain, Stefano. So just so you know that. This person says, I'm looking to move to Spain. I've got 2 dogs that I don't wish to part with. Are they allowed to return backwards and forwards to England now? And will they be allowed after the 31st of December this year?
That's a good question.
Well, I've never had a dog in my life, but as I understand it, dogs and other animals, you do, and you'll know because you've lived in Spain, dogs need to be chipped, don't they, Lucia? And as such, they have to have their own dog passport, in this case, animal passport. If they're not chipped, they have to go into quarantine. So if you're in Spain and you're leaving Spain and you've had them in Spain, you've got to have them chipped, both under Spanish law and under British law, United Kingdom law, have its own passport. If you don't, I'm not even sure if you can leave Spain without it being chipped, but on the presupposed theory that you can leave Spain, when you get to the United Kingdom, however...
Sorry, Stefano, let me just stop you 1 second, because they're saying they want to move to Spain from...
Oh, right, sorry. Okay, fine. So it doesn't matter whichever way it is. But okay. So they'd have to have a passport, they'd have to have it chipped. If it's not chipped or passported, I don't think it'd come out, you'd be able to leave the United Kingdom. But if you were to get to the other side, then they would put it into quarantine for 30 days, 31 days, however long it is that they'd have to put it into quarantine for. And then you would have to have it released. I know friends of mine who went to Italy, for some reason had to have their dog quarantined in Italy once it had arrived. They arrived by car and there was something wrong, and I can't remember what it was, but it was quarantined. So I think the ultimate thing is that you can take it abroad. I would make sure it's chipped before you leave the United Kingdom. Make sure all your animal paperwork is in order before you leave the United Kingdom. Will it change after Brexit? I can't tell you. I would not have thought that veterinary matters will change. They might get more difficult in the sense that when you arrive, they will actually physically ask you for the proof that it's chipped, the passport, etc., etc. Whereas beforehand, until now, you go and come and they don't really say anything. But I think, especially with Spain, having seen all the other things that have been happening in the last few months with when British people, United Kingdom people are applying to become resident in Spain, my understanding would be that perhaps they would be targeted, as many years ago were Brits who were coming out of Gibraltar, where I used to live, coming into Spain. We were always targeted to see whether we had the right car things like a spare wheel, the triangle, the jacket, another set of glasses if you wear specs, the first aid kit and all the other bits and pieces. And I think that we will, as Brits, be targeted more on these administrative things when we go abroad into Schengen countries as of 31st December 2020.
So, and if I may add to that as well, Stefano, we got our dog in Spain from a rescue centre there, and if you get a rescue dog, which I 100% advocate, they automatically come with the microchip in their neck, and you go through on the ferry or whatever, and they just beep their neck like you would in a supermarket or something, and it beeps and it comes up with all their information. But you do need to make sure that in Spain they need a rabies jab every year, whereas in the UK it's every 3 years. And they also have to have a worming tablet within 5 days of travel. So you have to travel within those 5 days. So I hope
that doesn't apply for the owners then.
No, no, not at all.
We actually moved our British Bulldog from Australia to the UK and then back again. And it was really easy going from Australia to the UK, and it was really difficult going from the UK back to Australia.
What was the difference, Paul, on the second part? Why was it more?
So Australia, I think she just had to have a shot, one shot 90 days before we left, coming to the UK. And going back, I know Australia has really strict animal laws. So there was loads of things we had to do to get her back to Australia before she left.
Where is she now?
She's in Australia.
All right.
So she's
Can I-
a well-travelled pooch then.
Can I just say, isn't it amazing? He's Australian. He lives in Great Britain, and the great, it means something. Yeah.
And he
Not
likes
just
the
Britain.
Queen.
He lives in Great Britain. And the second thing, he's got a British dog. What can we say?
Yeah,
Well, she was born in Australia, so she's at least a little bit Australian.
she probably has
Debatable.
an Aussie accent by now. She's been there a while.
Let's hope not. Let's hope she's kept her Britishness.
Oh dear, right. Thank you very much for that, Stefano. Okay, let's go to John for your first question.
Yes.
Today. So, John, I've currently got a bridging loan on a property which is currently half finished and behind schedule due to COVID. The loan has to be paid back by the end of June to the bridging company, and I won't be in a position to do this. So please, what is your advice?
Well, the first thing to do is to ring the bridging company, speak to them, and try and negotiate another 6 months. I doubt you'll negotiate a year, but you could try 6 months. They'll probably sting you for extra interest, but really, what choice have you got at this point? Selling a part-finished property at auction is painful and normally will cost you money. So many people are using these bridging loans like banks, and the clue is in the name, bridging loan. So a bridging loan years ago, people would only take a bridging loan out if it was 2 months, 3 months, knowing they've got a certain time when it's going to be paid back. Now what's happening is they're using these bridging loans like banks, and they're probably paying 10, 15% interest. You know, if I'm paying 15% interest on deals, I'm not going to make a lot of money. Mm-hmm. So unless they're clever than I am, some of these people, and some probably are, and they're using bridging money, how on earth they expect to make any money out of these deals? It's too much, you know.
And John, that's actually quite a good bridging rate.
5 or 6, well, there you go. It's madness. 5 or 6% interest is what you should be paying on money to deal if you can. You know, you don't want to be paying any more than that. And it worries me because I think the market in the UK is two-tier. You've got the domestic market of people buying the house to live in and flats to live in. That's one market. Then you've got the development market and the investment development market. And this is incredibly vulnerable during this time. And I think it will get worse. And people will get, because they have been able to get on site for 3 months, some of them, they can't get materials, they're way behind. And some of these bridging companies aren't sympathetic at all. Some of the clearing banks, if you're with them, I'm sure they will be, the big banks. But I mean, very few people now have got property with the big banks because they wouldn't lend enough money and so on. But there is a lesson here. And the lesson surely is, if you're having to use bridging companies at extortionate interest rates because they're lending you 80% of 80% loan to value or something like that, probably is why you're using them. Find some more money somewhere, find a backer, find a different alternative, because it's madness. And this is a typical example of what's going to happen going forward. But all he can do, no one's going to remortgage it at the moment, I would have thought, because it's half finished, this, that, and the other. All they can do, and I feel very sorry for them, but all they can do is hope the bridging company will extend the loan, and I'm sure they'll charge them more to do so.
What do you think they would add then to the interest, John? If you're saying like a 15 to 20 is actually a good rate, then what would?
I think that rate's extortionate. Paul was more in touch with it than I am, and I'm sure he thinks it's extortionate, but says that's what it probably is.
I mean, so bridging rates usually range. Sorry to jump in, John. Bridging rates usually range between 0.5% and 2% a month.
Oh.
Right. Wow.
I mean, it's appalling, isn't it? It's just appalling. It's taken advantage of people, really. You know, and if they're a big company, that's a bit different. But if these are individuals who are just getting on the property ladder, it's criminal, really.
Also, I mean, it is just pure unluckiness that this situation happened when it did, and they bought the place when they did. So, yeah, I feel for them. That's
just to add to one other option that might be available to this person is maybe speak with a specialist broker, because if their lender does say no or gives them very unfavourable terms, there might be another bridging company that would come in and take it over.
Oh, okay.
Rather
than just giving up.
Okay. My only concern with that, Paul, is because it's half finished, it's very hard to get another company in it. That's at this point. If it was finished, I agree with you. half finished is very difficult, I think.
Yeah.
And have,
In saying
the
that,
question,
bridging companies. Sorry, go ahead.
The first question is, Paul, is have these people got the money to finish it?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
I suppose the reason I suggested that is, especially the more expensive guys, the reason they charge those extortionate rates is they probably would lend on something like this. You know, they think very much outside of the box, or they'll lend to pretty much anyone, because they're not anyone, but you know, within reason, because the rates are so high and they can take a bit more risk.
And by the way, you know, we've all got issues at the moment. I mean, I'm paying £16,000 a month out in empty rates on properties that are finished, which I'm in the process of trying to sell. So, you know, it's all relative. And people forget about rates with properties. You know, when they're finished, these local authorities now are on you from day one, and there's no negotiation on that. If the property's finished, you've got empty rates.
Well, that brings us nicely actually onto our next question for Paul here, talking about rental returns on buy-to-let properties. This person says, everybody seems to forget the real cost of repair and insurance that can cost a lot of money during the year. So Paul, what would you suggest is the best way to mitigate this?
Okay, so this is one of the reasons that we tend to focus mostly on new or near new properties.
Right.
Because first off, if you're buying new, they come with a whole range of warranties. So you'll have a 2-year builder's defect period, which covers pretty much everything for the first 2 years, all minor defects. You know, a good example is I bought this place 18 months ago. A few weeks ago, one of the mechanisms on the window stopped working. I submitted a defects report. It was fixed a couple of days later, you know, headache and cost-free.
Right.
Now, of course, if you're a landlord and then your property is older than 2 years, that would be your headache and your cost. And quite often, if something's going to go wrong, it will go wrong within the first couple of years. You've also got your fixtures and fittings under warranty. You know, your oven, your dishwasher, your fridge, they'll come with usually 5 to 7 years of manufacturer's warranty. And you've got a 10-year structural warranty. So that covers the structure of the building, water ingress, design defects, all that sort of stuff. Okay. So it results in a much lower cost, lower maintenance property, so long as you're buying it at the right price, because that's probably the biggest objection we get to buying new, that sometimes new properties can be overpriced, but they're not always overpriced. And certainly if you're buying at the right price and you're getting those insurance policies that make them more passive, that's ideal in my view. You know, a lot of people like period properties and Victorian houses and that sort of thing. I couldn't think of anything worse as an investment, to be honest.
Thank you very much. I've got a grade 2 listed property, and you're right, by the way. It's a I
think it's like buying a vintage car. You know, you take it for a spin, something needs fixing. As an investment, that doesn't make any sense to me. I want a box that generates me money. And I don't want to be getting my hands dirty. I don't want to be fixing toilets every weekend. I don't really consider myself a landlord. I consider myself a property investor. And therefore that type of property makes more sense for me, and lower maintenance, lower cost. So if this person is concerned about maintenance costs, I'd encourage them to buy new properties that have all these warranties, and then they shouldn't have to worry about it for at least the first sort of 7 to 10 years until the property might need something done to it.
I guess in the meantime, make friends with local trades as well, you know, give someone a shout that can help you out. Okay, let's go on to Stefano's next question. So Stefano, we're back to Spain again here. Right. I own a house in Spain along with my partner. I feel like we should sell, as I don't know what the implications will be once Brexit goes through on the 31st of December. We've added... Sorry, John?
Good luck.
Well, we've added a lot of value to the property, and as estate agents have verified, we definitely get back more than we paid for it, as it's in a very sought after and well established area. I think it's almost impossible for us to become residential now, as the backlog of people doing this is so big. What would your advice be?
Stay put, don't sell.
Why is that?
Because the market is so complicated, as it is here, but it's so complicated abroad with Brexit, not only Brexit, but with COVID-19, that the market at the moment is showing false readings. Right. My view is that if you are not a seller that needs to sell, then I would stay put. It's only a question of months. I would review the situation January of next year. my view is that you would not get as much back for your property as you think, even though you may have added value to it with a swimming pool, whatever you've added value to it. The price, remember also the estate agents usually upsell your property because it's in their own interest to upsell the property. So they'll put it on at, let's say, 750,000 euros if it's a beautiful property. In their own mind, they know that they're not going to get 750, so they'll leave it there for a while, then they come down after a while and a bit more and a bit more. Had you put it on the market originally for 500, you'd have sold it straight away.
Right.
It's a lottery. I would stay put for all sorts of reasons, as I say, for Brexit and for COVID-19. Enjoy it and don't have any knee-jerk reactions as you wouldn't in the United Kingdom as well. I think the same policy applies in the United Kingdom, that, you know, just if you've no reason to sell it, if you're not what's called a motivated seller because something is pushing you to sell, then I would stay put and I would just sit back, just keep it in its beautiful condition and start the process of selling it if you still intend to selling it in January 2021.
I cannot believe we've now got Stefano answering questions about you ought to be an estate agent. You should. I thought you were a lawyer. You're now giving advice on property sales and what people should do. The fact is, you're right, is a bit annoying. The one thing I would say is this isn't gonna get better next January. You're stuck for a good 3 years. A good 3 years. This isn't going away anytime soon. You know, unemployment in Spain and places like that, it's going to be horrific, much worse than in England. And in England, they're talking about potentially 4 million out of work. So this isn't going anywhere. You want to batten down the hatches, enjoy your home, and forget about selling it. Just forget about it, because it isn't going to happen unless you want to take a big dive in its current value, perceived current value.
And in terms of
what I'd add, sorry, Lucia, is that my view is that the only places that you should consider selling in are major capital cities like Rome, Milan, Paris, Madrid, because then there's always someone, Monaco, there's always someone who wants a pied-à-terre for a weekend and the money to pay. But apart from that, I wouldn't be selling anything.
And
Stefano and I agree, which doesn't always happen.
That's not very common occurrence on the show. But just to answer the second part of the question, Stefano, they say it's almost impossible to become residencia now, as the backlog of people doing this is so great. Have you heard any more of that? Because I remember you saying in previous episodes that some of the I've forgotten the name of them now.
The administrative procedures.
Yeah, that they've just stopped taking inquiries about that.
Yeah, NIE. Well, it is the case now that NIEs, the alphanumeric codes that you need, the fiscal code that you need to buy property in Spain, as you know, because you've got one. They're very difficult to get at the moment because they're backlogged and the procedure very slow, and the police are taking the time in doing them. One thing to say is, though, the fact that you don't have residencia, i.e. the residence permit, by the end of this year is not a bar to you getting residencia. All you have to have done is put the application in by the 31st of December. And I'm not sure about this, but when I was doing a webinar the other day on Italy, one of the estate agents was telling me that the same thing happens in Italy, and it's not a close. You can actually put it in by the end of June 2021. So I'm not sure if the same applies in Spain. I can find out. But all you have to have done is put the application in by the 31st of December, and then you can get it, you know, in due course. You can stay on the basis that you've put your application in.
Right. Okay.
But remember, there's always the 90-day rule which applies, which is if you stay more than 90 days, you have to have applied for it.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you very much, Stefano. That's fantastic.
Good advice. Good advice.
Very good advice.
Thank you,
okay,
John.
then back to Paul for your. No, we're not on to Paul. Sorry, John. I do apologise. John, do you think that the UK property market will reduce in value over the next 2 years? And if so, how do you think the banks will react to that happening and their loan to value ratio?
Are you sure you don't want to ask Stefano that? Because he's the property expert now, isn't he? Have you noticed?
I'll just add a comment after you've finished.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Okay, so do I think the property market is going to reduce over the next 2 or 3 years is the question.
Yes.
as I've said, I think maybe in the last program, when someone asked me about cost, values, at the end of the day, there's, like I said, there's two-tier market in my view. There's a domestic market, and I think the domestic market, if you talk to Savills and Savills reports they've done, and all these big companies do these regular reports on the market, they think if you add them all up and take an average of those reports from all the big guys, then it looks like they're talking about a 5 to 8% drop in the residential domestic market. Now, as Paul always says, and Paul's taught me this, and he's absolutely reminded me, not taught me probably, but he's absolutely right. The UK property market is a micro market. So I said before, last time in 2008, we've got number of flats in Brighton. They never went down in price. Yet other places we had properties, they went down 30%. So it is a micro market, and certain areas, certain houses won't go down at all. Others will go down more. If you've got Rolls-Royce in Derby, for instance, and Derby, and they shed, 5, 6, 7,000 jobs, then obviously you don't want to invest in Derby. So there's all these, so it's a micro market. So on the domestic side, I think it will go down a little bit. On the what I call the development market, the investment development market, much more vulnerable. The reason it's much more vulnerable is because you've got, you're going to have unemployment going through the roof without question. No one's disagreeing with that. You've got a recession, potentially a depression. You've got interest rates incredibly low, and the banks are holding firm, which is good at the moment. But of course, banks won't lend the same loan to value as they do at the moment. Not to commercial people. So we're talking about, the business of development, the business of investing. So I'm not talking about the amateur market where, with all due respect, people buy a property and keep it 25 years. I'm talking about the more sharp end of it all, where, say someone's, you have a 5-year deal with a bank on your overdraft, on your property investments and developments, and the 5 years comes up, you renegotiate with your bank. Normally they'd say, yeah, go again for the next 5 years. What are they going to say this time? They're going to say, well, your loan to value was 70%. We now want to reduce that to 60%. We've just had it all revalued. And guess what? You need to put a load of money in to enable us to carry on lending to you, because the loan to value, one, we want to lend you less, and secondly, we just valued your property that's gone down 10%, your portfolio. So all these problems are going to boil up. They're not going to boil up tomorrow, but over the next 2 or 3 years, they're going to boil up, and that will have a serious effect on the property market.
Yeah.
Can I just add something to John's
Please
comment?
do. I thought you would.
I think you're right.
Thank you.
So I'll tell you a little bit as well. So what's been interesting? It's all these things are great in hindsight, and we can only talk about what we think might happen in the future. Yeah. But what's interesting at the moment is we've had lockdown. That's now easing a little bit. The mortgage and property market was put on hold during lockdown and kind of reopened, if you like, last week or the week before. The mortgage market has bounced back really strongly, which is impressive. In fact, new products have been released at higher loan to values than were available pre-lockdown, which seems counterintuitive, but it's the truth. So I think that's really interesting that lenders are seeing an opportunity to get back into the market. Now is a good time to be taking mortgages. And I don't, so far as what John said, I think maybe 2 or 3 years, I don't think it's going to be a downward spiral for that long. So at some point in that 2 or 3 years, we're probably going to have some form of, trough, so some form of reduction in prices overall. And I think, everyone accepts that. But on the basis that, as John mentioned, you can't invest in the UK property market. There's not really such a thing. No one has enough money to buy all the properties in the UK and get a good enough spread. You can only buy individual properties in individual areas. And certain areas where, I'm buying at the moment and our clients are buying, we're confident we'll do well regardless of the direction of the overall property market. And therefore, the logic of sort of holding off until maybe the price is reduced by 5% overall, when at that point in time, mortgages are likely to be far less available, So let's say, for example, yes, you pick the market right at the bottom and you get a 5 or 10% discount for doing that, but the loan to values have come down 15 to 20%. That doesn't make any sense unless you're a cash buyer and you're willing to, use that cash to take advantage of the opportunity. It doesn't make much sense as a standard buy-to-let investor, someone who's looking to build a portfolio passively, to be trying to pick troughs in the market, because it's more difficult to get finance when you're at the trough of a recession.
I would, Paul. What I've always said is that if you're a buy-to-let investor and you're borrowing the money over 20, 25 years, I don't particularly disagree with you. It doesn't really matter when you buy. At the end of the day, we know that in 20, 25 years' time, unless there's been some dreadful disaster, that you would have at least doubled the money from what you paid 25 years earlier. So I think that's not the sort of market I'm talking about. I'm talking about, as I explained, the hard-nosed end of it all, the sort of end I'm at, where it's dog eat dog, and there's big capital gains to be made, and there's big capital gains to lose, and it's not for everyone. And the buy-to-let market is a very safe market compared to what I'm talking about.
On that though, John, in the property development market, would you not agree with me that unless you have the capital to take advantage of opportunities at the trough of a recession, it's going to be very difficult to get any form of finance at that point in time anyway?
Yeah.
So if you want to do a property development, maybe doing it now could be a good idea, unless you want to wait 2 or 3 years.
Well, if you look at what I'm trying to do at the moment, and whether I've got it right or not, who knows, but I'm looking to buy portfolios, residential portfolios, which with income, because I think that's pretty safe, which is similar to what you're telling your clients to do. The difference is I'm buying in bulk, and then I'm going to trade them out individually, hopefully to other people, or keep them for a while and trade them out. I'm not looking to do any detailed big developments. And the reason for that is, although I could probably fund some, the reason for that is I don't know where the market's going to be in 2 or 3 years' time.
Yeah.
So I know that if I've got residential property with a yield, that yield will save me. I can pay my mortgages, and I can, at worst, I can pay my mortgages. At best, I can sell them at a profit. So that's a very safe market to be in. Where people are incredibly vulnerable at the moment are where they've got a project 3/4 way finished, they've overrun. Normally the bank would help them out and say, well, don't worry, we need to lend you another couple of $1,000 to get the project finished. We'll do that. Going forward, these banks probably won't say that, because they'll be worried about, banks are incredibly cautious, and they're not going to help out other people, their clients, if they can avoid it. And that, and it's very, very dangerous, very vulnerable. If you've got a part finished development at the moment which isn't going well, you've got to really question that, because they're the most vulnerable. Because 1, it's not finished, they can't rent it out. 2, it's not finished, they can't sell it or refinance it. So they are in a very vulnerable position, those people. Luckily, everything we've got is finished at the moment, so we're okay.
Thank you very much for that, John, and thank you to Stefano and Paul as well for all of your input today. That's the end of today's show. If you would like to send us an email, please do. ask@aquestionofproperty.co.uk is the email address, or just leave your question in the comments. Thank you very much for watching. Thanks to you guys. See you next time. Bye-bye.